Many people think that fish tanks are an easy way to spice up a room or area. However, fish tanks can take extraordinary work in order to give fish and other aquatic life a happy and prosperous environment. In today's episode of The Tankers, we discuss exactly what work you have to put into a tank before you can put fish into it, and what work must be done to keep the tank's environment prosperous. Alright, I just want to say thank you all to Zach and Chance for joining me on this episode of The Tankers. So we're focusing mostly on fish tank stuff. Clearly, it is The Tankers, but one of the big things is a lot of people, when they start thinking, oh, I want to get a fish tank, really nice thing to have to a room. It's cool keeping fish. They're really exciting. We have like 9 in this house right now. So, and it really does add to a room and make it more exciting. But a lot of people don't realize the initial work that goes into, starting a fish tank. So just when you all think about getting a fish tank, what are the first thoughts that kind of go through your brain?
I usually think about it depends on the size of the tank, and the fish that you want to get in your tank is going to be basically the deciding factor of how much it's going to be, how much effort you're going to have to put into it, and all that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah, some people don't realize it can get pretty expensive, especially the fish are going to be the cheapest thing that you put in the tank, depending on what you get, because you need the tank, you need some sort of substrate, which is like sand or rocks at the bottom, the heater you have to get, the filter, a light, potentially if you want a lid, you probably want a lid because most fish like to jump out. But you need all that startup stuff, and then you need to let the tank cycle. So you need to let the tank sit with bacteria so that it actually can decompose the bioload of the fish.
Yeah, there's a lot to look into. It's not just pick up a $10 tank at Walmart, throw some water in it, and then throw your fish in it the same day. People should research their stuff a little bit more, which I think Petco and other places make it seem a little too easily of a hobby to get into right off the bat.
Yeah, always do your research first when you're going into it. I've made mistakes when I first started out, not doing enough research on just buying fish that look cool at Petco, and then realizing they really don't work in the tank that I wanted or with other fish that I wanted to use. Always condition your water, otherwise you'll kill your fish.
Is that one of the biggest issues you'd say when starting a tank is conditioning the water?
Just to make sure you do it. It's just to make sure your water is balanced in the levels that you need it. Conditioning it, because chlorine will just instantly kill your fish. It'll just make them literally their flesh fall off their bones, and they just
burns
die.
Their gills.
When you all started your fish tanks, you each have a couple at this point. What was the biggest issue?
For my saltwater, it was cycling and money. Saltwaters are very expensive.
My 15-gallon, the first one I set up in the house, I rushed a little bit too much, and so I thought the tank was cycled, and it was not cycled enough. I didn't let it sit long enough. So to cycle my newer tanks, I use artificial, or not artificial, but live bacteria from bottles and stuff you can use to put into your tank. And the biggest thing is patience with fish tanks, and take your time, because you see all these things at Petco that you're I want to get that fish and that fish and that fish, and then eventually you kind of just overload your tank too quick, and it can kill quite a few fish.
With fish tanks, there's the two, hopefully most people know this, you have freshwater, you have saltwater, different fish live in different waters and everything. Which one of those would you all prefer having as a tank?
Saltwater, if you have the time and the money to afford it.
Yes, freshwater is much cheaper than saltwater, and the water chemistry is quite a bit easier. You don't have to mix the salt in. I always really natural tanks, so as long as the tank is natural, I really like freshwater, and picking and choosing the right fish, because everybody's had mollies or platies and all those simple tetras and whatnot, and it's getting the cool freshwater fish that really makes it. But saltwater, depending on what you put in it, is
It's a different level.
It's a different level, because if you get corals, it's it's an animal, so it's another live animal. You're not just growing plants. There are some freshwater tanks that can outdo some saltwater, but a really good saltwater coral tank, I think, is absolutely amazing.
I know, definitely. So I have a small little 5-gallon freshwater in my room, and it's a lot easier than what you all do with your saltwater. It's easy. You just make sure the I don't even know what it's called, but add the little treatment to the water, and then just make sure it's the right temperature, and I can put my fish in. I don't have any plants or anything like that, so it's a lot easier. So for people who are just trying to get into the fish game, definitely just start out with
the basics.
Fresh water, some fish.
No planted anything. I would just, if you're just getting into the hobby, just go, fish, and that's about it. Fish are much easier to take care of than plants, and worrying if you have to carbon dose, and worrying if you have to CO2 dose the tank or put other elements in the tank to make the plants grow. It's just easier to
the
get
nitrates at the correct level.
Yeah, you have to go into like fertilizers and like making sure your lighting is correct, and then researching your plants enough to know like whether or not they can live in this kind of water conditions, because each plant has different parameters. Most basic plants at Petco, like ferns and like sorets, are just pretty basic. They're pretty easy to take care of once you get more into the hobby, but you want to definitely upkeep on those. You definitely want to do water changes on the tank, which is taking out some of the water, introducing new. It helps reduce the not bacteria, but the waste from your fish and stuff. You take a siphon and usually go through the gravel and get all that fish poo out and stuff. And cleaner fish are always good too. Cleaner fish always help with keeping your tank clean and keeping it nice and healthy.
I know, just from a very uneducated point of fish tank, I like cleaner fish because you can always see them eating stuff, and that's just another entertaining aspect of having a fish tank, is actually watching them. Because like the fish I have right now will occasionally try to eat stuff off the rocks or the things I have in the tank, but on Zach's tank he'll have snails that are pretty big size, and you can see them on the sides, and you can see their entire mouth going and stuff. So cleaner fish, that's why I enjoy them, because I can actually watch them eat and stuff, not just swim around.
Cleaner fish are pretty interactive, especially for freshwater. A really good cleaner fish for the bottom is called cory cats, and they come in many different colors and stuff. It's like one of the basic catfishes that most freshwater people keep, and they're really cool and interactive to watch because they're always moving around.
So when you all had your first fish tanks, what type of tank was it? And if you all remember what type of tank and everything, and what exactly did you all do before you set it up?
So my first actual fish tank, besides like having a beta bowl, I set up a 10-gallon tank in my grandparents, and like I had like a sunken ship and stuff because I was like 8, so I wanted all that like cool stuff. My grandma actually did a lot of research for me on that one because I just didn't really want to at that point, being 8 years old, but we let the tank cycle and stuff. We ended up actually breeding guppies in there on accident, but I didn't do enough. I did a decent amount of research. It's just I always just went to Petco and picked like community fish rather than like anything that could be semi-aggressive or aggressive. My actual first tank after that is what I did, a planted tank, and I did a sorority of beta females in that tank. And the research with that is figuring out which fish can actually cohabit with beta fish, especially just with females. They're not as aggressive, so you can actually keep a few of them in the same tank together. And doing enough research just to know which fish can coexist.
Yeah, my first tank was a 20-gallon long, and I had put, I think it was a crappie and a bluegill in there that I had caught ice fishing, and I did not do like any research on it. I was like, hey, they're fish. It's water. They come from water. It's all the same thing, right? And luckily, like North American fish are really hardy. At least bluegill are for sure. So you could throw those things in like a puddle of mud, and they'd probably survive a day. So luckily, with my first experience, I didn't have any casualties, and I ended up upgrading them to a bigger tank eventually. Yeah, that was my first experience with fish tanks.
I feel like I'm at Chance 8-year-old level, where I was like, I got a fish tank. I just want fish in it. I don't have any plants. I just said, Chance, what should I get? Chance, come to Petco with me. Help me find some fish. Yeah. So I can relate with 8-year-old Chance very much with my fish tank experience. So when you all put like live plants and anemones in your all's fish tank, I know you have to do a lot of research, to figure out exactly what fits in, if it's freshwater, saltwater, obviously. Actually, are there any anemones that live in freshwater?
No.
No? Okay. So I know, so if you're getting anemones, clearly you got to go with saltwater. But is there anything necessarily that you wouldn't, that I, as a very uneducated person on the subject, would not think of if wanting to get an anemone?
Well, anemones, you definitely should do research because some anemones will kill fish and they'll eat them, or they're an aggressive species of animal, so that if they move, they could potentially kill coral if you're keeping a coral tank too, because they reach out and they do have stingers and needles or whatever on their tentacles. So you want to like watch out handling some species, because some species could actually like be very irritating to your skin. But then there's also like ones like one Zach has, he's got a bubble tip anemone, and those are like really good for hosting clownfish.
Oh,
do you have anything to add, Zach?
You also need to, a lot of people don't know that you have to spot feed anemones 1 to 3 times a week for them to be completely healthy, especially if your clownfish in your tank, if you have one, isn't hosting with it yet. If your clownfish starts hosting with the anemone, you only need to feed it about like once a week with, frozen krill that you warm up. But that was something that I did not know when I first got an anemone, was that you actually need to spot feed it. So
spot feeding is where you literally take the food and put it into the anemone's mouth.
Basically, you let the tentacles grab it, and then the tentacles from there pull it into their body and then direct it into its mouth.
And the biggest thing with anything saltwater, including anemones and corals, is to acclimate them. So usually Zach puts them in a bucket. It's called jerp acclimation. So you put them in there with some water, and then you take a little tube. There's like stuff you can buy for this, and you literally just let the water drip in there for like half hour to an hour, so that the animal has time to adjust to a different salinity level and pH and temperature. Because otherwise, even with freshwater fish, if you don't let them adjust to the temperature and just throw them into a new tank, it can kill them from shock. Because some fish are hardy, but otherwise fish are just kind of when it comes to being like livable in different conditions rapidly. So usually you let the like bag float you get from Petco or another fish store in a freshwater tank, so that the temperature can acclimate. Let them float. Don't mix the water, because you don't want different things being transferred from one water place to yours if there's parasites or sickness. And then some people in salt waters, when they get really big, expensive fish, they quarantine them for a bit. So they'll order them, and they have a whole another saltwater tank just set up for them to live in for a while, to make sure that they're like parasite free, sick free, and they actually like live like a week or two in there, to make sure that they don't have anything wrong with them before putting them in your actual tank.
All right, thank you. That's about all the time we have for today's podcast on the tankers. I just want to say, if there's any fish that they talk about, like that sounds pretty cool, remember to look up the fish, do all the research that's needed for it. Same with corals, anything they mentioned. They also, if you just want to see exactly what they look like, that's a really good thing to do. So really best thing is you want to find fish that look exciting to you, that way you visually enjoy them. But thank you, Zach. Thank you, Chance, for coming on and talking about how to kind of start a fish tank and what to know.
Thank you.
All music in this podcast came from the YouTube music library. Thank you to Music Lover for giving the song Classic Rose to add to this podcast. And once again, thank you to Zach and Chance for joining and sharing some knowledge on fish tanks.